Hello and welcome to the 30th episode of the Extreme Sports Performance Podcast. My name's Ryan Blake, I'm the founder and director of Extreme Sports Performance. In this episode, I'm talking to Tom Stringwell. Tom is a strength and conditioning consultant and co-founder of Your Gym Sports Performance. We ask him the questions we ask all our guests: who he is, what he does, where has he come from and what has he done along the way, what are the key moments from his career so far, what are his top areas of interest, what are the most valuable things that he's learnt, who are his top influencers, what are his top resources for information, what are his top sports performance exercises and or drills, and what are his top pieces of advice in life, exercise and or sport. And finally, where can people find him? We freestyle in between questions as usual. Really enjoyed recording this one with Tom. Hope you enjoy listening to it. Here we go. Hi, Tom. Welcome to the Extreme Sports Performance Podcast. Please, could you start by telling everyone who you are and what you do?
Hi guys, great to meet you all. My name's Tom Stringwell and I provide sports performance consultancy across a range of sports. And I'm also the co-founder of Your Gym Sports Performance, providing strength and conditioning based education, helping people branch into the world of strength and conditioning and applied sports performance within their particular areas.
Awesome. Could you give us a little bit of a history lesson, Tom, of where you started out, what you've done along the way to where you are now?
So, if you go right back, the reason I ever got into training, education, performance, whatever, was boxing. I competed as an amateur boxer. If any of you guys that have ever competed in combat sports or do compete in combat sports, they are quite unique. As in football, if you're tired, you can pass it. In combat sports, if you're tired, then you essentially get beat up. So it's a sport where you're accountable to yourself with your fitness. And I was living in the gym, and I essentially thought, wouldn't it be great if I could do this and get paid for it? So I went down the whole route of gaining the relevant qualifications, the level 2, the level 3 qualifications. Started personal training. Realised quite quickly that I've got a love for sport and sports performance. This was prior to a time of, which sounds prehistoric now, social media. So I was lucky that I got advised to start looking at texts with classic authors, people like Bondarchuk and Tudor Bomp and these sort of people. So I got advised early to start reading those texts, which was great. Realised that that's the route that I wanted to go down. And then started that long journey. So I was a senior student, we could class it as. By that I mean I got a mortgage, so there's no freshers week, unfortunately. So I did a sport exercise degree by distance learning through Manchester Met at the Old Crew campus. Absolutely loved it. Got quite a good feather in my cap. I graduated with a first class honours, which was nice. Then halfway through that process, I discovered the UKSCA, what that was all about. Did what most people do and looked at the criteria, what needs to be done. So this was around 2009. Looked at what had to be done and realised that I didn't know enough about certain subject areas. So I sought out a weightlifting coaches to help improve the weightlifting part of, prepare me for the weightlifting part of the practical assessment or the accreditation, and soon discovered that I've got a strong love for weightlifting and powerlifting. So that was the first club I lifted at was in Featherstone, a great British weightlifting recognised club. Anyone around that neck of the woods, I highly recommend you give those guys a visit. It's not a very frilly gym, but what you will get as a coach sat on a plastic chair watching every single set telling you which rep was good, which was bad, what you need to do. I then started lifting through Sheffield Hallam Barbell with Dave Hember, competed in weightlifting, and I've had a strong love for weightlifting ever since. So I've competed in weightlifting at a regional level, and I've competed in powerlifting. And it's ridiculous the federation needs to be called this, but I've competed in the British Drug-Free Powerlifting Championships. And I've competed within that at a national level. I competed at the Brits. Came third from the total. So I've got a strong love for weightlifting and powerlifting. And really through that, it became kind of obvious that, and I think it was maybe because of two things. Maybe because of the weightlifting and the powerlifting, and it's all about the force application and the rate of force development. And where I did my degree, Manchester Met, it is a very biomechanics based university. They've got a big biomechanics hub there. So again, I soon realized that I got a big passion for sports biomechanics. By the time I finished my degree, I was UKCA accredited. Not many universities at that point were doing masters in strength and conditioning. So I realized I think I would prefer to go down a sports science route. So that's what I did. And I did my masters at Loughborough in sports biomechanics, which I absolutely loved. And alongside all that, I have always taught. So I've always worked in education, both within health and fitness and within sports performance. Originally within health and fitness, and now all I do is deliver strength and conditioning based qualifications, and I've done for the last 6 years or so. And I've always worked in sports performance concurrently with education, because I also love teaching. I love educating. I love mentoring coaches, helping people get UKCA accredited. In between all that, I did the normal S&C route of an internship, gained a position, and then I've worked within rugby union, rugby league, and now I provide performance consultancy across a whole range of sports, from MMA to competitive boxing, BMX Supercross, a whole range of sports. So I'm currently working with Accrington Stanley Football Club on a consultancy basis. I work with MMA fighters up at the Full Contact Contender in around the northeast and northwest region. I provide consultants across a whole range of sports. So not so much a direct route, quite an undulating route, but you normally find when you speak to most people, that's the case within S&C and sports performance.
Sure thing. It sounds like a really interesting journey, and that's why I always love asking guests on the show that question first, just so the listeners can get an idea of their route and their experience. So, bearing everything in mind that you've just said, what would you say the key moments from your career so far have been?
So, it's quite easy to go down a route of achievements with such a question, which I'm a massive advocate of critical thinking and critical listening. So the key word there is influential moments. What have been the big influences, the big game changers? And one would have to be during my sports science degree, realizing my love of biomechanics and how much it underpins so much within S&C, which I often find is lacking when I work with S&C coaches towards mentoring, and that input, that light bulb moment of, okay, we are increasing force development through strength training. We are increasing rate of force development and power through Olympic weightlifting. There's a rationale and reason for why we're doing these things in these sports. And as you know rightly, the more you work with higher end athletes and the more you work in higher end settings, the more that rationale's got to be bulletproof. So realizing that situation, and probably the first time I walked into a mechanics lab, saw a force plate, saw some EMG, realised what this was actually all about and the validity of actually testing these methods. That was definitely one important influential factor. The other, realising my love of S&C, and it was what I want to do. And it's quite obvious, you know, I always say you are a true academic when you've read a journal in a pub with a pint. Once you've reached that stage in life, that's when you realise you're an academic, or you're applying academic-based work within your practice. And it takes a special passion for what you want to do to be able to do such a thing. And probably the other key influence of recent was taking it upon myself to set up my own education provider, to become my own education provider, which is a massive leap from working on behalf of companies to realizing it's about time I put my own stamp on this industry, hopefully for the positive. And that was definitely a big moment as of recent.
Awesome. And what would you say the biggest lessons are that you've learned along the way from when you started out to now?
So I think all S&C coaches are probably guilty of the first time they get into an S&C environment, trying to be too much of an S&C. And
Guilty.
Yeah, you know, not forgetting those soft skills and those soft skills that need to be developed. As much as I push academia and as much as I push doing things on evidence-based practice, you've got to learn those soft skills. You've got to learn those negotiation skills. You've got to learn what the athlete's buying factor is as to why they're going to do what they do. If I'm working with a professional rugby player who has been in 10 collisions within 80 minutes, each one the equivalent of a motorway car crash. So they've had 10 motorway car crashes biomechanically in 80 minutes. And that happened on Saturday, and it's now Monday. And 48 hours later, I'm about trying to persuade this person to do some jumping on a jump mat so I can test their CNS fatigue. That takes a special kind of persuasion. And it takes you knowing the athletes and being able to buy into it and knowing when to back off and knowing when to push and knowing how to individually manage different athletes and realizing that different athletes tick to different ways. You know, I've worked with some athletes where you could say today we are jumping off a cliff, and they say, okay, where's the cliff and how many times? I've worked with other athletes that want to know the ins, the outs, the buying factor for everything. Some athletes that will willingly train themselves into a hole, especially in a team environment or a combat sport environment where it's all about being competitive and not showing a weakness. It's very easy to let the athletes just fall into a trap of, you know, you do the wellness questionnaires, you check the CNS fatigue. It's quite obvious of the fatigue, but they don't want to stop training. So probably learning those soft skills ongoing is bringing a big learning curve.
Sure thing. What would you say your kind of go-to methods or approaches are about managing difficult athletes who don't necessarily want to buy into what you're selling or what you're asking them to do?
It is difficult. It's especially in a team environment where you've got group dynamics and you might have got different guys with different influences. So, you know, I've worked in team sports where you've got people that are pushing to try and get a loan to a higher Premiership club, or, you know, you've got people that have come to the realization they're not going to get that loan and they're going to stay where they are. I think if anything, in such a case, it's just trying to manage how much they can not disrupt the rest of the group. Trying to get those guys on board, find out what their buying factor is, find out what the individual emotion is, and not looking for external motivators, not looking for that amazing speech by the coach or that, you know, rocky montage. It needs to be an internal motivation for those guys to drive performance. Sometimes it just needs to be a comparison of normative data. this is where you're at, this is where you need to be, and that's where you want to play.
Yeah.
The numbers speak for themselves. But yeah, definitely, I think I've been in situations where you need to manage those disruptive, potentially people that can disrupt the team dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is completely different when you're working with a group environment compared to individual athletes. For any of you guys that are working in sports performance where you're working with teams, I would definitely recommend you have a look at the psychology of group dynamics and behaviors and group alphas. Then you'll soon start to look at the group across the whole group in a completely different manner.
Sure thing. I think you made a really good point there, is that those athletes within a team who tend to be more disruptive or don't want to necessarily do what you ask or have their own way of doing things, sometimes don't realise how much it affects everyone else around them, not just the dynamic between the coach and the athlete, but it does affect the whole team. So yeah, that's something that you learn over time, I think, but it all comes down to people skills and communication. I found that really can make that a lot easier.
Yeah. And I think you see it gets amplified at different times,
Exactly.
Especially when you get towards playoffs. The people that are normally quite recluse will be more recluse. The guys that like a bit of banter will try and do more nervous banter. And you just start to see the different environments get amplified a little bit, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. I've noticed there's a big difference as well with the age of the athlete and I suppose the type of journey they've been on, whether it's more of an old school journey, maybe a bit less scientific, versus like the athlete who's gone through an academy and gone through more of the new school journey, which is nothing but scientific. Yeah. And you've got the ones in the middle who've had a little bit of both. So yeah, I think there's a lot that shapes that framework. But it's ultimately a challenge I think everyone has to deal with. It's just a question of how. So what would you say, Tom, at the moment that your top areas of interest are in what you're doing?
So besides to education, which is a massive driver of what I do, and I won't be able to stop myself at least doing some teaching at some point on this podcast, probably. Biomechanically, and again, I keep up to date all the time with current literature and mechanics. I think a key area of interest in the moment within mechanics is computer modeling, computer model simulation of. It allows us to ask a lot of questions that you couldn't normally ask of a participant. It overcomes ethical barriers. So I would say watch this space in regards to the use of more of computer simulation modeling in biomechanics. So as an example, Dr. Mark King at Loughborough, I can send you the links to the studies. He asked a simple question: is it possible for a gymnast to do a flat somersault 3 times on a mat? So not a tuck somersault, a flat somersault. Is that possible to perform a triple somersault on a mat? A double gets done all the time, but it's seen as a very high scoring move. Is a triple somersault possible? Now, obviously, ethically, I cannot get a group of gymnasts and say, right, I want you all to now try a triple flat somersault. So what the guys at Loughborough did were they recorded a gymnast performing a double somersault, and you need to feed some data into the computer model. So they had the guys performing that whilst being filmed via a 2D analysis. So in other words, markers placed on the body, which then when you play back creates a movement stickman, if you can imagine that, for you guys that aren't so familiar with mechanics. So now you've got a moving stickman, which tells me the joint angles, at what point those joint angles are changing, the range that they go through. And through a process called inverse dynamics, if I've got the joint angles, I can work out how much torque is being produced at each joint by the muscle. So they created a moving model using There's 2D analysis and the inverse dynamics to create the model. They also had him, whilst they were filming it, so they could record, obviously, the anthropometrics, limb sizes, or what we call inertia, the inertia of each limb. So essentially what then happens is you can feed all that information into a computer model, which the guys did, and then make sure that it looks really like and it's accurate to the real movement that happens. So you check it against the real movement. Was the height the same? Was the distance the same? Was the angle at which they rotated, the speed at which they rotated, so the angular velocity the same? Once you've got those numbers, and they got their model to around 98% accuracy, then really it's limitless what you can do with that model. So then they said, okay, let's speed up the approach run and see what difference that makes. And you soon find that the person can hit a 2.5 somersault, but not quite a triple. Okay, let's increase the torque at the knee by 50%. Let's just think about that for a minute. Can you imagine if you could just do that with an athlete? Let me just increase how much torque you can generate at your knee by 50%. There you go. An instant increase in knee extension strength. So they increased the torque at the hip and the knee. And what they found were that run-up approach speed didn't really have much of an effect on someone being able to perform a triple somersault. And by the way, they did find with the computer model that it was possible. But it was only possible if you increased the torque at the knee and the hip by a high enough percentage. Well, how do you increase torque at the knee and the hip? Through strength training. You make someone stronger. You improve. So what you've done there, you've used a lot of complicated mechanics to simply prove the stronger an athlete is, the better they'll be able to perform in regards to rotation when performing a somersault.
Sure.
So there's numerous studies, and the guys at Loughborough have done a lot of computer simulation modeling, and I think that could be a big leading area of sports science. Massive. And I also have real interests in, I don't know if you look at force velocity curves, profile curves, we're all aware of a force velocity profile curve. For you guys that have not heard of a force velocity profile curve, essentially the more force a muscle can generate has a inverse relationship with the shortening velocity of the muscle. And what you generally find is that the quicker the muscle is shortening in velocity, the less force that can be produced. And vice versa. If the muscle shortening velocity is not massive, then you can produce more force. So what you end up with is that force velocity curve, which, if you know a bit of maths, a hyperbolic curve, of which people are aware of. But if you actually look now at the research into force velocity profiling, always remember that power is force times velocity. So one way you could increase someone's power is either increasing force or velocity of muscle contraction. So the research is now looking towards, well, can we profile someone's force velocity curve after performing a movement? And basically say, okay, what needs to increase that power output? Is it the force that they're producing, or is it the rate of the muscle shortening velocity? And what I really like about this type of stuff is all this science is good and well, but it's the applicability. It's the applicability towards the field that you're doing in sports performance. So what would that actually mean in real life? If you had a force plate with an athlete and you were trying to improve power output, have them perform a vertical jump, map the force velocity curve, and then say, okay, do we need to increase force more, which then puts more of a focus on strength training, or do we need to increase velocity more and put more of a focus on power-based movements, Olympic weightlifting, plyometrics? So the transfer of training effects becomes specific to the individual, rather than one model fits all. I do think that's going to be a big leading area, and I also read a lot on velocity-based training. I do think watching the field of velocity-based training, it's quite well established now, but I think we're just touching the surface with that. I think it's opened up a whole new parameter. And again, that relates back to your force velocity profiling. Yeah, so I think the simple model of a block of this and a block of that within the training format is probably going to be a bit outdated. And now we're starting to look at the actual individual themselves and really writing some truly sports performance training that is individual to that person. So as you can see, I'm a biomechanics geek.
Awesome. And I think that is as you said at the start, before we chatted, that it's a big underestimated area, maybe an area that I suppose a lot of coaches don't maybe know enough about, or they don't implement as much as they possibly should into their programming or their needs analysis, because it's key. And every athlete, whether even if they're in a team, is different shape and size. No one's going to be the same. So it's so important to consider. You've just alluded to VBT there, and that's again an area of special interest of mine. So that leads on really nicely onto the next question of what hardware, softwares, technologies have you used in the past that you've found useful, and also what have you used that you found not so useful?
So I mean, with the velocity-based training, I was lucky enough at Loughborough, where money's no object. I remember saying to the guys, I need a gym aware velocity-based training unit, and I got ushered towards a cupboard, opened the cupboard, and it was absolutely packed full, shelf upon shelf of gym awares. So that was my first experience of using a velocity-based training method, technology. I was very lucky because if you actually do a bit of research, the gym aware model's pretty expensive.
Mm-hmm.
But it was worth the investment. So I personally purchased a gym aware unit, and I think it's not just a good measure. It's not just for you guys that are unaware of velocity-based training, what me and Ryan alluded to, it's essentially where the gym aware unit, from an actual standpoint, it's a little box that has some magnets on the bottom. I attach it to a plate, put the plate on the floor, pull out a cord, tie it around the bar, and as the bar moves, the wire displaces or changes length. And if I've got displacement over time, I can work out the velocity. And it does it for you on the spot. So I can start saying, you perform this movement at 3 meters per second or 2 meters per second. I like the gym aware because it's just accessible. It's quick to set up. Once you've got used to it, it's pretty quick, and all the lifts are all predetermined in algorithms, which is very, very useful. But what I've actually found it very useful for as well is a measurement of fatigue. A measurement of fatigue with an athlete, because as much as we like to apply periodization models, which essentially is predicting biology, which is very hard, we are predicting biological adaptation, which if all scientists could do this, it would make medicine especially a lot easier. So we're trying to do something that is very hard in our practice. And in reality, it can't be that accurate, So I've had guys where they've come in and they are performing, let's say they are performing a hex bar jump. So the studies are a bit conflicting in regarding to the loads. And again, I can put these studies for you guys to have a look at. But some of the early studies suggested 20% of 1RM back squat. Some have gone up to 40 and 60% 1RM back squat. So that means you're putting a load on the bar that is as a percentage of their 1RM back squat. Obviously, you need a good back squat in the first place. You need to be able to land correctly. Mm-hmm. And what I've found is that the speed at which people can perform those movements undulates so much I could have someone performing a hex bar jump with 60k on the bar, and one day they're hitting 2.5 meters per second, and then you see the effects of a big training session, or they might have a technical, tactical training session later on that day. And then all of a sudden you look at the numbers and they're down. It's like a lie detector. So I do think, not just for the application of improving velocity, I do think that very velocity-based training is very useful as a measurement of fatigue and as a motivator, a direct motivator. The numbers don't lie. This is the speed you should be moving at. I've seen athletes moving at a slow speed, and a quick show of the dial of what they're at, and before you know it, it increases. So I've used velocity-based training gym awares a lot. I found it very useful. I've not used it within a weightlifting setting, within a weightlifting club. It's got obvious applications within a weightlifting club, but I don't know, weightlifting from the old British weightlifting clubs that I train at, they just come with that bit of old school mentality. If you walked in there with a velocity-based training unit, they might not like it. So how much application it would have in that field, I don't know. It would be interesting. Yeah, so I've had lots of application with that, and I've also another big. I personally think another big biology, another technical advancement in recent years is the use of GPS. The use of GPS units, a massive investment because they're not cheap. But if you read the old time motion analysis studies, which was 3 or 4 people with a camera attempting to catalogue the entire movements of a team during a game, and then sieving through that data and making sure it correlates with resting heart rates. That's hard work. And then now you've got the access of a GPS. Stick the GPS on, and away you go. It tells me a hell of a lot. And again, I've seen the boys call them lie detectors. Within rugby, there's no hiding place with them. And I think if you look at the research by especially Leeds Beckett, Professor Ben Jones, Gambit, these people, researchers, they're using with the connection with Carnegie, they're doing a hell of a lot of research into the use of GPS across the whole range. So talent selection, for example, they're using the metrics pulled from the GPS for talent selection, the effectiveness of small-sided games, and allowing the GPS data to steer where those small-sided games should be going for what type of effect you want from it. And some of them are quite obvious. You have a 3-on-3 on a bigger pitch, and what's the result? Well, they do more high-velocity sprints, and they do them over greater distances. Well, I said that's quite common sense, but it just allows you to quantify that load. So I think, velocity-based training in GPS has probably been the biggest game changers that I've certainly had access to in recent years.
Sure thing. Couldn't really agree more with you, mate. To be honest, I use those. As you know, the listeners know, I work with a lot of youth athletes, all the way from early teens to late teens and early 20s, and multiple sports. And with football and rugby athletes I work with, we use the push band, which is the wireless version of the thing you were talking about, GPS units as well, with both sports, sometimes in training, but definitely for every match. And it is really useful. And to start with, I was guilty of just throwing out way too much information. Look at all this great data, but then obviously that can be very confusing, and it can also be unnecessary. So now we just choose key areas or key aspects of data from each thing, and just use that as I suppose, an individual measurement or gauge of whether they're above, below, or within the right kind of range of where they need to be, depending on whatever it is we're looking at. So that's really useful. as you said, that technology is becoming more and more accessible to people. It's getting a little bit cheaper over time, and they are kind of allowing more entry level type hardware to be put into the market, which is great. But yeah, as I said, the key thing there is probably not to overly rely on all that data. But just use it to inform your programming and your decisions, not make them for you.
You just end up with an endless list of numbers, and essentially what you need to ask yourself is, as a team, what information do we want to get out of it, and what are we going to do with it? And then that's when you can start to really pull the metrics, and say, okay, what are we trying to do with this data, and what message are we trying to get? And again, I've seen it both used in both ways. I've seen it used as a motivator, sometimes probably incorrectly. So, player load has been down, distance covered has been down. It's a call into the office. Your numbers have been down for the last 2 or 3 weeks. A bit of a motivation to say, okay, I best up my game. But in reality, you could say, well, the bigger question is, why are the numbers down?
Mm-hmm.
There's probably a fatigue factor. Have you liaised with the physiotherapist? Have them look at their movement skills at the moment. Is the fatigue affecting their movement ability? Maybe speak to the dietitian. Are they looking after the recovery in between? So I think it's really effective to use across that multidisciplinary team as well. Beyond just the S&C coach. What's it telling us about the athlete at each level?
The other thing which I think you find is in the weight room, the VBT data, if it's on certain lifts, really can create a lot of buy-in and intent with those athletes to work that little bit harder. And also when GPS data after a match is, put in front of the team and everyone can see everyone else's data, it becomes very competitive. And whether it's you're looking at volume data or intensity data, as I said, we choose one from each category for each athlete. And any athletes have got the same metric. It's hilarious because they're so competitive anyway. But if they see that they've outperformed themselves, they're one of their teammates, it's just banter central. But it's really good though, because those who aren't possibly getting the numbers that they should be or want to be, it just gives the coaches opportunities to approach them in an indirect way about maybe what they aren't doing enough of or what they're doing too much of, and you can create those conversations that can lead to positive change, which is great.
Yeah, I think one of the most important pieces because as much as the biological systems that we're trying to predict are unpredictable and undulate, S&C coaches are very guilty of liking a model. We love a model, we love a pyramid, we love a table, we love stages. And I think one of the most useful resources I ever picked up on with velocity-based training was Dan Baker's, who I've mentioned previously, in regards to his jump-based studies. Dan Baker's power model, so his different stages of power. So I'd advise anyone that is using velocity-based training to have a look at Dan Baker's power spectrum, I think he calls it. And then there's different set velocity speeds of the lift, depending on what type of power you're trying to get. So he essentially says power is force times velocity. You've got power with more force and you've got power with more velocity. So do you want it moving? Do you want a lightweight moving really quickly, or a heavier weight moving not slow, but slower compared to the lighter weight? So it gets you to think about different stages on that power spectrum. It just gives you a bit of guidance of where you need to be putting people in and what type of quality you're trying to get out of it. So I found this stuff really, really useful when I first started using them.
I've been to a couple of his workshops over the years. One was particularly on VBT, and it was fantastic. He goes into lots of detail about using bands and chains as well. So anyone who's really interested in finding out more about that, then give it a search. There's lots of resources online which you can access, which are free. But I will also put the links to that and the links that you mentioned, Tom, into the show notes. So anyone who wants to access them for more reading, further reading can. So that again alludes nicely onto the next question I was going to ask you is, if you needed to find out information about something or more information about something, what are your kind of top go-to places, your top resources to try and find that?
I suppose depending on the subject matter. If it is a biomechanical related question, or I'm looking for a solution, or then the obvious place is the Journal of Biomechanics, biomechanical research. But at the same time, I've had some very important mentors, people that have helped me along the way, and I know some very skilled biomechanical brains that I can go to if in doubt. People from Manchester Met, people from Loughborough, where the go-to people if in doubt. The nature of biomechanics is a very mathematical based subject. I'm personally like that because it provides working models. But especially if you read computer simulation model studies, for example, the mathematics can get quite heavy going. So it's good from that respect. I would have definitely go to biomechanical people that I can speak to. As much as I like doing things based on journals and the recent evidence, there's always go-to text that I think are valuable, cornerstone texts that come off the shelf more than most. And there is some great biomechanical text that I would recommend. And again, I'll give you the details later on, Ryan, so people can have a look, both at an introduction level and a higher, more advanced applied model. In regard to strength and conditioning, I love the work of the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. I think it's become a cornerstone of that field. It's the go-to place, and I think it just shows you now how much of I've spoken to previous S&C coaches that started S&C and right at the start of its development, its field, and really they were a jack of all trades. They were like Swiss Army knives. Those old guys. They were, what's your job title? Somewhere between a sports scientist, performance analyst, S&C coach. But I think now with the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, it just shows you how much it is a subject in its own right. And not only that, how there is different sub-subjects within that area. You will get authors that are authorities on change of direction, on ACL prevention, injury prevention, so a prime example might be lumbar pelvic training. I'd say a go-to resource on that's always going to be Stuart McGill. Look at McGill's work. And you'll get these different big key authors or authorization researchers within these little certain subjects. So I think now the field of S&C has opened up that much. In regarding to go-to resources text for S&C, I personally, again, I'm happy to give people a reading list. I'm sure you have done that previously yourself, mate. Then you look at, essentials of strength training and conditioning and these type of texts. But I think Paul Gamble's work, I'm a massive fan of Paul Gamble's work. Paul Gamble's got 3 great texts on S&C. And I think reading those texts made me realize how much I needed to up my game when I first started working in S&C is to, 1, I need to know more about certain subjects before I come back and read that book and be able to fully grasp it. And 2, how much he does a great job of basing things on evidence versus hearsay. So I'd highly recommend Gamble's work, definitely.
Awesome. I'll put all those links into the show notes as I said before, just to give people, I suppose, more access to more information if they feel that they need it. But yeah, that's really useful. Thanks, Tom. So I've got a couple more questions, and then I'll let you go because I promised to keep you for only an hour. So this is the one that everyone hates being asked. But what would
Okay.
you say your top sports performance exercises and or drills are that you use more regularly than others and you find that you have great success with?
Oof. Huge question. Huge question. Okay, so in regards to mobility, and I know people often look for hidden secret mobility drills that are the key to movement, the ones that are going to open up access to new movement. Having trained in and around weightlifting clubs, you'll often find how very little time weightlifters actually spend on mobility. And I remember speaking to Cyril Martin, a great weightlifter. The guy's an absolute guru of weightlifting. GB coach. He's based at Atlas Gym at Alfreton. If anyone's in that neck of the woods, I highly recommend you pay a visit, and he'd be more than happy to have you in. I remember once speaking to Cyril about this and saying, what's your go-to drill for improving squat depth? And he answered very simply, more squats. And that's always been something that's stuck in my mind. I see a lot of people spending 45 minutes on mobility and then 10 minutes on front squatting, trying to improve the front squat. And I would say that would need to be reversed. As much as mobility drills do help and they are important, to improve movement quality, practice the movement. How do we, the amount of times I've had people on courses or coaches say, I feel really unstable in the bottom of the snatch. How much time do you spend in the bottom of a snatch in your training? Do you do pause snatches? Do you spend some time in the bottom? No. Well, that's why you're not comfortable down there. So I know that's probably a bit of a cop-out, but I would probably say for improving specific exercises, yes, the mobility drills are important, but look for actually practicing the movement more. And that's going to be the key to unlocking the movement quality. Because if I put 100k on your back and you maintain a good spinal position, you will get lower. Gravity is reliable. It is going to pull you lower to the floor eventually. Yes, it will be a little bit discomforting, but if you cross the wall into performance, you've crossed that line to accept a bit of discomfort. Don't injure people, but to accept discomfort. There's a difference. In regards to Olympic weightlifting, which, as you know, I'm an absolute weightlifting geek and love weightlifting, I would say there is some go-to stages on the process of learning the Olympic lifts that are your green light to then proceed further.
Okay.
For snatch, a snatch balance is key. People often say, I can catch a snatch in power, but I don't feel comfortable to catching it right at the bottom. So a snatch balance, the key term there is, and again, I'm always OTT about this with coaches that I work with. Don't use the word catch in the bottom or drop under the bar. It should be more of a cue of drive under the bar. Pull yourself under the bar, because it needs to be an active drive into that position rather than just a fall and a drop, which implies you just drop under the bar. But for a snatch balance, it's as simple as this. How can you expect to be able to receive the bar in the bottom position of a snatch if you can't get down there explosively in the first place? If I ask you to do an overhead squat, and it's quite obvious that it is a very awkward, gingerly movement that you don't feel comfortable doing, then it doesn't take Sherlock Holmes to work out that you're not going to be able to get down there with rapid speed. So if snatch balance is good and they can receive that bar at depth with speed, punch under the bar aggressively, then for me, that's a green light to say, right, now let's start really working on some snatches and getting down there. Because as the weight goes up, the highest the bar gets on a snatch is probably going to be about just above hip height. And then you're getting under it. I always say, once you're snatching your body weight, then you're starting to experience some true lifting. Before then, you can get away with little mistakes, but at that point, you can't. And for clean, the obvious precursors, front squats. You know, I've had people often say to me, how can I improve my clean? What's your biggest clean? 100K. What's your biggest front squat? 105. Well, there's your answer. You know, if you can front squat 20 and 30K surplus of your clean for reps, then I know that when you catch that bar, you're going to be able to come out of that hole pretty quickly. So I would definitely use front squats as that precursor to say, okay, if you earned the right, if you earned the badges, if you earned the stamps to start attempting big cleans. And you'll often hear athletes say, I can't snatch, but I can clean. My clean's quite good. Well, I often say, I'll be the judge of that, because if you're cleaning 1.5 times your body weight, you're starting to play with some big numbers. Until then, you know, I've had rugby players that weigh 100K and they say, I can clean 80K pretty good. Well, so you should be able to. Relative to your body weight, it's very light. You look at someone like Jonathan Edwards, a triple jumper, who for me is the epitome of rate of force development and power. He could power clean 150, but he weighed about 70 odd kilograms, which is probably why he could cover 62 foot in a hop, skip, and a jump. The guy just was a powerful person, you know. So, yeah, I'd say probably less time mobility, more time practicing the movement for weightlifting. If you can snatch balance, then you're going to start being able to do some snatches with some good weight and catching the bar at depth. And if you can front squat, and not just front squat, but front squat coming in and out smoothly. You know, I remember looking at the Tommy Yule stuff, or Stuart Yule, one of his lectures, and he talks about productive strength. So that front squat needs to look like the same positions you need to be on the clean. So if that front squat finishes in a massive kyphosis, it's not very productive to Olympic weightlifting. It's okay being strong, but it needs to look the same. So hopefully, mate, that should be suffice. But
awesome answers. Everyone's answer is different. But yeah, I know it's a ridiculous question because, you know, it depends on so many things, and everyone has different, I suppose, tools in their toolbox because everyone doesn't necessarily work with the same group of athletes, so or have that available. So yeah, no, really good insights. Thanks very much. That is gold dust, and it's sometimes the best answers are the simplest ones too. So yeah, very, very good stuff. So just finally, what have you been working on and what have you got coming up end of this year, beginning of the next year?
Well, the most recent big project has been the launch of my own education company, Your Gym Sports Performance, and the main motivation behind it is that when I first started working in sports performance, and I'm sure when Ryan first started working in sports performance, that it is probably fair to say that Olympic weightlifting platforms, barbells, plyometric boxes, that stuff was behind the hidden curtain. It was behind the hidden curtain of performance. And whether you will like it or not, that has now entered the mainstream world. I think there's an opportunity for us as S&C coaches rather to go down the route of saying those practitioners shouldn't be using that kit for X, Y, and Z, or shouldn't be training like that for X, Y, and Z. I think rather than do that, it is our responsibility to embrace it and say, okay, well, if people are going to use it, let's use our experience to teach people how to use it and how to do it correctly. Because I've worked with athletes, for example, type as MMA fighters who are competing at a high level in MMA that can't afford a dietitian, can't afford a separate physiotherapist. They're spending 2 or 3 hours at a time in a gym in an evening. You then put some strength and conditioning work on top of that AM, and they're working 8 hours in between. These are the sort of people that aren't going to be going into performance centers. These are the people that are going to be training in mainstream gyms, boxes, etc. And I say the tools are there. The people are there. There's going to be recreational triathletes that spend £4,000 on a bike frame, despite the fact that they've got high body fat percentage, which would do far more effective to the performance if they reduced it. We all know some middle-aged men in Lycra. I think there's an opportunity for us to say to people, right, let's not stick his nose up to these people and say, right, let's educate people how to use this. Yes, they might not be academic, but I can teach people how to base their decisions on evidence. As long as I can teach them what significant means and what a correlation means, I can do that. And I've had people that have done the course with us and then gone on to do a degree, and I've gone on to do UKCA, and for me that speaks volumes. That's probably one of my proudest achievements, more than anything that I've done myself, without sounding cliche, because it means I'm now giving those guys the tools to then go on and do performance. So sure. that was the reason, that was the motivation behind it, and just to give people the knowledge and the mindset of to say, okay, here's the tools, this is what S&C is all about. I mean, a prime example I always give is a box jump. A box jump, if you land off a box of a good height, due to Newtonian mechanics at the point of landing, your weight, which is not just your mass, your weight is your mass times 9.81, which is gravitational pull. If you stood on the floor, it's not really relevant. Jump off something, it becomes relevant, because the longer you're falling, the heavier you're getting. At the point of landing, you're probably about 4 or 5 times body weight off a box that's around 70 meters in height. And if you're landing with a knee valgus, that's compression of the lateral collateral ligament. It's a shear force of the medial collateral ligament. The ACL is getting twisted under high force. And it's happening now repeatedly for a minute. When you're seeing people say, let's do box jumps for a minute and as many as we can. Let's not. Let's make sure we can land first. Let's make sure we can land correctly. And let's do a set of 3 off a little step. Because what they don't realize and appreciate, and that's probably a little bit of their fault for programming it. It's probably a little bit of the fault of the industry for giving people access to it without the right training and the right education. And it's probably a little bit of our fault for saying, well, we've got the knowledge to teach these people, let's teach them, rather than sticking his nose up to them. So that's the plan, and that's why I did it. Yeah, we launched Your Gym Sports Performance. We ran the first course this month. I'm actually teaching this weekend, and hopefully giving people the tools to then maybe then progress and work towards UKCA or SCA, or if not, just giving people the mindset and the tool set of how to apply S&C within their practice. So that's the current project, and it's a big old project.
Awesome stuff. So if people wanted to find out more about that, more about what you do, what are the best ways that they can find out that information?
So on Facebook, the company is just Your Gym Sports Performance. So if you put a search in for Your Gym Sports Performance, you'll see that come up. I'm more than happy. As you've probably gathered, I can talk about S&C and plyometrics and Olympic weightlifting and biomechanics until the sun comes down. So if any of you guys want to DM me, my name is on Facebook is Thomas Stringwell, Stringwell. I'd be more than happy to discuss and help people. The website is www.ygsp.co.uk. So that's the best way you can find us. But I'm always happy to help people and to talk S&C.
Awesome stuff. Well, Tom, thanks very much for coming on the show. It's been great to chat, and good luck with everything. We'll speak soon.
And thank you for having me. It's been a great pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the 30th episode. We hope you enjoyed the show. Please leave us a rating or review on whatever platform you're listening on. Be sure to check out our website, www.extremesportsperformance.com, that has details about our in-person services, our online store, our media pages, our contact details, and how to subscribe for free to stay informed about company news and updates. Join our social media community on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter and LinkedIn. Links to these can be found at the bottom of all pages on our website and via any search engine. Until next time, take care.